Now that the 2021 season is officially over, it's time to answer the question that everyone keeps asking. Is CeeDee Lamb still a top 5 Dynasty wide receiver? Let's find out.
He's on fire!
What's up, everybody? Nate Liss here. Now, before I attempt to restore your faith in CeeDee Lamb, if you like the content you see today, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. If you guys want more content just like this, do me a favor as I work on building this channel and hit the subscribe button so every time I post new content, it will get to you directly. I appreciate all the subscribers that join me along the way, trying to get this in front of a bigger audience as we go. So it's greatly appreciated. So let's jump right into it. Now, before the 2021 season kicked off, CeeDee Lamb was easily inside the top 5 Dynasty wide receivers. In fact, he was locked into that position with no question whatsoever. But as soon as the 2021 season ended, we started seeing tweets like these. Let me pull them up for you. First off, let's start with my own. I mean, this is a great tweet from Nate Liss right here, which you can find on Twitter at @AnOutrageJew. And I point out the fact that age 21 and age 22 CeeDee Lamb, when we look at his scrimmage yards in total, over 1,000 yards his rookie season, over 1,100 yards the next season. And then we look at all the metrics that he made a climb in. We see his target share rose, see his yards per route run rose. We see his yards after the catch per target rose. Target separation got better. But yet there's still this concern that CeeDee Lamb is not a top 5 Dynasty option. And for those of you that have him on your roster, I understand you're in this weird conundrum now. You're like, what do I do? Do I trade him? Do I keep him? What's the plan? I'm going to tell you as we get going, but I want to start it out with a good tweet before I go into some of the worst tweets that I found. The next one that I came up with here, Deebo Samuel or CeeDee Lamb in Dynasty. Straight up, who are you drafting this offseason? Aside from Deebo's abilities after the catch, he hadn't really been that impressive at the NFL level up until this point this year. We had seen glimmers from him. We've seen injuries. It's just something that dated back to college. But let's not forget that while he was in San Francisco, they drafted a first-round wide receiver thinking that that is the addition this roster needed. And as soon as Brandon Ayuk was added to San Francisco, go back and check the history, everybody gave up on Deebo Samuel. Some people called him a buy low, but nobody said that Deebo Samuel was going to be this can-do-all top 5 fantasy option. Now, over at the Breakout Finder, which many of you know me from, we have something called the dynamic score, which looks at the usage of a player from college as a punt returner, as a kick returner, as a rusher. We knew Deebo Samuel was incredibly dynamic. The rushing production in college validated this, but at the NFL level, it really hadn't shaken free until this season when he finally broke loose. And of course, everybody fell in love with him. But again, if you're asking me who I prefer, if I prefer a 26-year-old player who officially broke out in year 3 or the one with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons who's 3 years younger, I don't see why we're not emphatically selecting CeeDee Lamb. It's close in terms of year-to-year production, but of course, in Dynasty, it's a 26-year-old versus a 22-and-a-half-year-old. It does feel like a no-brainer, but it gets worse. And I got to know, how did this tweet get 220 likes? From Burgers and Blitzes, CeeDee Lamb needs to go to a wilderness retreat and learn how to be a man versus a flashy boy who can't live up to the moment he begs for? What does this even mean? What does this tweet even mean? What is a flashy boy? I don't understand what any of this means. I'm not sure the root of this, but the fact that it got 220 likes, I'll put a Kendrick Bourne tweet out there that's like, gospel, digging deep, finding metrics that nobody's called out before, rarities. Gets like 60 likes. This guy gets 220. Come on, what the hell's going on here? And then it gets great. This is the one that actually made me laugh right here. As a fan of the movie The Joker, this one was pretty good from, of course, Mark Jackson's burner account. CeeDee Lamb dropped the most important ball of the game. I guess he didn't CD ball coming, with all due respect. I mean, that I would at least appreciate seeing these types of tweets. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for comedy. I'm looking for something looser. I'm not looking for tweets like this from Andrew. ranking CeeDee Lamb as a top 5 Dynasty wide receiver after the season that he had is absurd. He constantly makes mistakes, is not on the same page as his supposedly fantasy-friendly quarterback, and can't win on the outside. Is there any metric or film case for him over Amon-Ra St. Brown other than college stats? Listen, first off, for this to even work, we have to move CeeDee Lamb out of the top 10 to come meet St. Brown. There's not some conversation inside the top 10 taking place. We're not all huddled up going, yeah, both these guys are top 10. We really got to consider this. He's been very good this year. That's not the case. St. Brown is much, much lower, like 12 fantasy spots lower, 14 fantasy spots in Dynasty lower. So it only works if you're willing to move CeeDee Lamb to the mid-20s. And not to dismiss what Brown did, but it feels an awful lot like what we saw from Travis Fulgham with the Eagles when there were 0 weapons around him. 5 consecutive games where he got very red hot. Everybody fell in love. Now, before the comments blow up and someone goes, you can't compare Fulgham to St. Brown. Listen, there was a period in time where people thought Fulgham was actually good. And it was a massive detractor to this myself. Go find it on Twitter. I said, sell him. Everybody was holding him. Big mistake, a product of a guy that had nothing else around him and was getting a ton of target share. Now, St. Brown played a lot better than that. St. Brown proved that he's likely a player that's going to hang around in the league, but we've seen this story play out before, and I'm not ready to even have this conversation. These two players are not in the same tier. And imagine for a moment acting as if college production didn't matter. That's literally where this conversation started 2 years ago. So Andrew Lama is trying to stretch the boundaries of reality and turn this into a talking point when it's never been one, at least not in this galaxy. I'm going to eliminate Andrew from my screen right here. Here's the real problem that nobody wants to talk about. The fact of the matter is the Dynasty game right now has 2 players at the very, very top of it. Okay, it's without question. It's Justin Jefferson. It's Jamar Chase. You can rank them however you want. I don't care. The value between them is so damn close. You can flip-flop them. There's no questions asked. But no matter who you compare to them, they're always going to seem like they don't belong. There's no player in the league that we can compare to Jamar Chase, that we can compare to Justin Jefferson, and you're going to go, oh, yeah, they belong in that tier. Nobody belongs in that tier. These are the Randy Moss level producers. At least Jamar Chase is in that right. But CeeDee, like many others, is being compared to 2 guys that literally entered the league at their ceiling. The argument that I'm trying to make for CeeDee Lamb is that we haven't seen his ceiling yet. What's happening with these 2 elite players in Jefferson and Chase is that they came in at the ceiling. They came in playing at a level that we almost never see happen. So to compare them at all is absolutely asinine. And by the way, nobody projected Justin Jefferson to ever reach this level at the NFL, caliber production. Nobody ever predicted Justin Jefferson to be here. So again, it's funny when they're ranked side by side and we're like, these 2 guys are elite. But if we roll the clock back 400 days, you're going to see a lot of people with questions whether Justin Jefferson is better than player X. How good will he be in this offense? Will he get the targets? It's very clear what's happening here when we look at these players as they were when they were prospects. But to say that CeeDee Lamb won't break through the ceiling either is probably where people went wrong. This is where we're going to end up wrong again. If you make the assumption that what we've seen from CeeDee Lamb is the only version of this player for the rest of his career, then you will likely get it wrong. But on top of all of this, when we look at Justin Jefferson in particular, he saw 167 targets in 2021. That was 47 more than what we saw for Lamb on the year. People hate to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because I want to prove a point. CeeDee Lamb's numbers, if he also saw 167 targets in 2021, based on his catch rate of 65%, based on his season-long yards per reception of 13.9, we would have tacked another 400 yards on top of his 1,100, and he would have ended up roughly over 1,500, which is a little less than 100 yards short of Justin Jefferson, which comes out to about 5.8 yards per game. It's not egregious, and I know what people are going to say. Look, the argument is that targets are earned, But some teams utilize their alpha properly, and others are learning the hard way why they probably should. That's my argument here. But if Lamb is outside the top 5, then who's still inside the top 5? It's a serious question that exposes the problems with the actuality of the top 5 as it's represented today. For instance, let's talk about A.J. Brown. Let's pull up A.J. Brown here for a second. A.J. Brown is considered a no-brainer in Dynasty, right? Which is interesting because in addition to him being nearly 2 years older than CeeDee Lamb, I've got another bit of news for you, as you guys can see, which I've pulled up on the screen already. Look at their numbers side by side as receivers. This is per game averages over their career. They're separated by about 0.5 receptions per game, so a half a reception per game. They're separated by about 4 receiving yards per game, and they're separated by about a third of a touchdown. That's not a very big gap when people are talking about grabbing CeeDee Lamb by the shoulders and throwing him out of the club, but A.J. Brown is staying in there? It's a very confusing situation when we consider also with A.J. Brown throughout any point in his career, he's never seen more than 105 targets. CeeDee Lamb, up to this point in his career, has already gone by that every year that he's been in the league. So if it's about target share, then you give it to CeeDee Lamb. And if it's about competition, CeeDee Lamb's got more trouble around him than we've seen A.J. Brown have around him ever. It's very close between these two players, but people will try to convince you that A.J. Brown is light years ahead of CeeDee Lamb. It just doesn't make sense because by the numbers, they're nearly identical. Now, another player that you often see in the top 5, and I'm a Seahawks homer, so it pains me to say this, is DK Metcalf. Now, DK Metcalf, total alpha wide receiver, monster guy, 6'3", 228 pounds, runs a 4.33, athletic freak, almost fell into the 3rd round of the NFL draft. Whole league got it wrong. Thank God he went to Seattle. But if we look over here at the data that I've dropped on the screen for you, this is a guy that's considered top 5 dynasty wide receiver, finished as the wide receiver 14 in 2021. And we look at the numbers side by side. Again, CeeDee Lamb averaging almost a half a reception more per game. CeeDee Lamb averaging 1 less yard per game and 1/3 of a touchdown less per game. Again, somebody convince me. I don't see the difference here. I don't see it. DK Metcalf is a player that was considered more raw coming into the league. DK Metcalf is a player that has Tyler Lockett, who's always been the alpha player, essentially with Russell Wilson. The link between these two is so good. And again, DK Metcalf, 3 years in the league, the most targets he's seen in any given season is 129. CeeDee Lamb this year finished with 120 in 1 less game than DK Metcalf. And based on the average of CeeDee Lamb's targets per game, which is 7.5, he would have essentially been neck and neck with DK Metcalf in total targets for the year. But of course, nobody wants to talk about this. Everybody wants to prop these other guys up like they're infallible. Look, DK Metcalf, 14.4 fantasy points per game. The wide receiver, 22 on the year. CeeDee Lamb, 14.6 fantasy points per game. The wide receiver, 20. Again, I don't understand what's going on here. And I don't really see a difference between Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson, except the fact that oftentimes Dak Prescott's actually throwing the ball more. It's confusing to me that the top 5 consists of Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, always A.J. Brown, always DK Metcalf. Why is CeeDee Lamb getting kicked out? You could argue that he hasn't hit his ceiling yet. It's the truth of the matter, and it's very confusing to me every time. Now, I love A.J. Brown, and I like DK Metcalf a lot. But very clearly, for a many sharp dynasty players, you're going to rank A.J. Brown over DK Metcalf. DK offers a ton of upside as a touchdown scorer. That's what's kept him in the conversation so much, not to mention he's gone over 1,000 yards in his career. The problem for me, though, is that his production game to game can be very variant. It's what we've seen with CeeDee Lamb this year. It's the reason that a lot of people were very upset with him. But here's the reason why you should not be calling game on CeeDee Lamb and acting as if he has reached his ceiling just yet, because there's another former receiver that he looks a lot like. He looks very, very similar to this wide receiver. And many people haven't even noticed yet. They haven't even caught on to this, and that is DeAndre Hopkins. Now, if you look at DeAndre Hopkins when he entered the league in 2013, in his first year, he had 52 receptions for 802 yards. Second year in the league, 76 catches for 1,200 yards. That's essentially right there with CeeDee Lamb. Now, what happens is everybody probably thought, oh, DeAndre Hopkins, he's not special. He's not doing anything great. Year one, this guy had to struggle with playing with basically Andre Johnson. Year one, year two, he kind of broke out a little bit. Then year three, the runway was clear. Andre Johnson was gone. And once Andre Johnson left, he went through the damn roof. You look at DeAndre Hopkins in year three in the league, 192 targets, 111 catches, 1,500 receiving yards, and 11 touchdowns. Now, guys, I guarantee you people were telling you that DeAndre Hopkins wasn't that great. He was a decent receiver. He was a product of this. He's not a good athlete. People forget what DeAndre Hopkins did. This could very well be CeeDee Lamb's ceiling. Now, maybe it's not 192 targets, but I don't see why it can't be 150 targets, which we've seen DeAndre Hopkins clip multiple times. DeAndre Hopkins from 2017 to 2020 was easily, definitively inside the conversation for the Dynasty wide receiver one, and there's no debate. There is no debate about this. From 2017 to 2020, DeAndre Hopkins, who CeeDee Lamb looks like, a lot like, who CeeDee Lamb could very well have a ceiling like, finishes the wide receiver 2, the wide receiver 1, the wide receiver 5, and the wide receiver 4. He finishes a top 5 wide receiver for 4 consecutive years after his first 2 years in the league. He didn't even do in his first year what CeeDee Lamb did in his first year, which was ultra impressive, being used as a rusher, being used as a receiver, with all the talent around him as a rookie in the league, very young coming into the NFL, similar to DeAndre Hopkins, a younger player entering the NFL. It's just weird to me that we do this, that we forget so easily how some players take some time to grow. I was in my patron group. We were talking in the Discord, patreon.com/I'm outraged. And they had made mention, what about Stephon Diggs, which was another great example of a player that didn't even crest over 1,000 receiving yards until his 4th year in the league. His 4th year in the league is when he finally did it. People will tell you Stephon Diggs was not putting it together. He was never going to hit this crazy ceiling. Since then, he's had a 1,500-yard year. This year, he goes over 1,220 yards, 10 touchdowns. He's one of the most liked, revered, best separators in the league, even though by the metrics, it doesn't necessarily show that. But this is the point. You get caught up in these trap games where you go, this guy's never going to be better. This guy's never going to outproduce Adam Thielen. This guy will never produce with Josh Allen. Oops, wrong again. And you're just trying to guess. You're trying to be prophetic ahead of what's going on, but it's just such a miss. DeAndre Hopkins, miss. Stephon Diggs, miss. A.J. Brown's top 5. DK Metcalf's top 5. Whoa. But they're exactly the same in terms of production. So the only way you can convince yourself of otherwise is by spinning a narrative going, well, A.J. Brown's going to see much more targets next year. Julio Jones didn't look that good this year. Julio Jones has been gone all year. Oh, well, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett's getting old and injuries. And if DK Metcalf starts to learn the route tree a little more and the target share goes up, but he's producing exactly the same as he was. He has flatlined, where I'm telling you, CeeDee Lamb continues to propel forward. But I think the problem is now to everyone, CeeDee Lamb after this last Dallas playoff game is untouchable. This is really where it started. He didn't have a great year. Then in the Dallas playoff game, he didn't look that great. He was underutilized. And then everybody dogpiled on and said, oh, we're off of him. We're off of CeeDee Lamb. And he literally fell in many dynasty rankings from the wide receiver 3, 4 to the wide receiver 8, which I just don't understand. It doesn't make sense. And I know people hate Troy Aikman, so I'm going to paraphrase a bit. But essentially, Troy Aikman came out with a quote. You can check this out. And he basically said that if he was the quarterback of this team and CeeDee Lamb was getting single coverage as he was, I would have just kept throwing him the ball. He would have had 10 catches at the half, or he said Michael Irvin would have. He said essentially, What Dallas was trying to do is they were trying to scheme around their star players. They were trying to get the ball to Cedric Wilson, and they were trying to outsmart everybody versus doing what Joe Burrow does and what they're doing in Cincinnati and just throw it to Jamar Chase and just throw it to Jamar Chase and just throw it to Jamar Chase. It doesn't matter. Throw it to your best players. CeeDee Lamb is a dog. He proved it back in college. He's shown it at the NFL level. This is a guy that's already had multiple 100-yard outings. It's not a question. This guy is a great player, and he's being dropped down to some level that I can't even justify. I have no idea what people are doing with CeeDee Lamb right now in their rankings. And you go back and look at Dak Prescott this year, and Dak Prescott wasn't overly accurate all year long. That's something that doesn't come up much. I mean, you look at PREF, and you look at him in that Dallas-San Francisco game, and 34% of his passes were considered bad throws, essentially uncatchable. There was a lot of pressure. It wasn't a great game, and they were trying to throw it to other players that were not the superstar players on the team. So if you're going to change your ranking based on one outing for CeeDee Lamb after putting up 1,200 yards in the year with Amari Cooper, with Michael Gallup sometimes, with running backs that get targeted out of the backfield, with a tight end that seemingly came out of nowhere and at one point was seeing a 31% target share, well, I understand why you think that CeeDee Lamb won't progress from here, but I'm telling you, by the numbers, he deserves to be amongst this rank of players. And by the numbers, you're saying he hit his ceiling, which he didn't. Jefferson and Chase have hit their ceiling. CeeDee Lamb is probably not close to his ceiling yet, and I would be willing to bet that there's a 1,300-yard season still inside of him, and I'm very certain of that. But we look at the Cowboys' offensive change. The Cowboys don't have a ton of salary cap space going into next season. Paid Dak big money, paid Amari Cooper big money, paid Zeke big money. Lots of money has been spread around in this offense, and the Cowboys are potentially losing Gallup this offseason. Now, he tore his ACL late, and I've thus speculated that his best offer may come from Dallas with the continuity, maybe a rehab season, but we've seen it with DJ Chark, similar injury, gone for the year at that point. I think that Michael Gallup is gone. Now, Schultz, the tight end, is also a free agent at the end of this year. If these two players don't come back, I don't see how we're not having the conversation about teeing up CeeDee Lamb for a much bigger season than what he had this year. It's not crazy to think that he goes to 140 or 145 targets next season across 17 games. Look, CeeDee Lamb only played 16 games in 2021. Had he played a 17th game, based on the 14.6 fantasy points per game that he was averaging, get ready for this, he would have finished as the wide receiver 12 overall. And I'm not even sure we're having this conversation if that happens. Had he played a 17th game and performed at the level that most of you guys appear to be sick of, he would have been a top 12 wide receiver in the NFL. Let that marinate for a minute. I mean, it's a shocking stat for you, but it's crazy to me that people are just glossing over this. And I understand some other players inside the top 12 didn't play 16 games. But the fact of the matter is we're trying to avoid players that have been injured. It's the reason that Deebo Samuel is such a shocking player for me. We knew he was a great talent. We didn't know if he could stay healthy. He didn't show it in college. He hasn't really showed it in the pros. So why is he ranked so highly? It just brings me to the question. If CeeDee Lamb's not in the top 5, who is in the top 5? Again, with zero doubt, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, they're the 1 and 2. Nobody's debating that. Nobody will debate you on those two guys being 1 and 2. But from here, it's where the argument truly begins between all these players, because we look at who we have here. You've got essentially Deebo Samuel, who's crept up for many people up into this potential top 5, top 6 argument. But again, I already laid out the case. Deebo Samuel's been hurt multiple years, didn't necessarily explode until year 3. He's 26 years old. He's 3 years older than CeeDee Lamb. That doesn't make sense to me. How does this happen? We used to be more concerned about age players, but guys like Cooper Kupp, some of these older year producers have sort of revitalized the stat. Who else is in there? T. Higgins? I mean, T's not necessarily in there yet, but if you want to make the case that T. Higgins is, it's an ultra rare situation to have a guy like T. Higgins and a guy like Jamar Chase both end up inside the top 5, because it's rare to have two guys even finish in the top 10 together. We've seen it with Juju Smith-Schuster and Antonio Brown. We've seen it in the past from Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. It happens semi-annually, but not that often and not often enough to say that these two guys should be side by side in the fantasy rankings. The other concern is how many weeks are you going to get where both of these guys are going to go off? And eventually the alpha will be Jamar Chase. He is the alpha, but all the target share will go to him. And I think by playing this game, you will end up with volatility between your production, which is what you're already getting from CeeDee Lamb right now. But again, he hasn't hit his ceiling. And potentially, let's see what happens with Cooper. People assume Cooper could be a trade candidate. If you don't have Dalton Schultz returning, if Michael Gallup's not there, obviously the offense thins out. Dallas needs to consider that. But there's a runway here for CeeDee Lamb to go up, and CeeDee Lamb was clearly the alpha in this offense anyways. But let's keep going. Deontay Johnson's 25 years old. We don't know what's going to happen with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's been a product of Big Ben and Big Ben's inability to throw it down the field. Deontay Johnson's great. He's a target separator, but it's been proven at the NFL level that separating isn't necessarily the stickiest metric when it comes to production. Again, Stephon Diggs has consecutively been a not great separator in the league. And at the wide receiver position, speed is overrated. So those two metrics right there alone are not very sticky. So you've got Deontay Johnson. His situation's changing. He's 25. Stephon Diggs is 28. Stephon Diggs is 5 years older than CeeDee Lamb. For goodness sakes, who is trading CeeDee Lamb for Stephon Diggs? Outside of maybe a contender, but even then, if I'm a contender, I want that skilled youth on my bench. So A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf perform essentially the same. Deebo Samuel is often injured in 26. Stephon Diggs is 28. T. Higgins, you're not going to put two guys from the same team in the top 5. I don't think that would ever happen, but go ahead if you want, but there's volatility issues there. Now, I understand the way the rankings are designed isn't necessarily that you're going to end up with two of the guys in the top 5, but to put them in the top 5, you're saying both of these guys are going to be top 5 producers, and I think that volatility is going to show itself. Devontae Adams is old. Tyreek Hill is getting old. DJ Moore is going to be 25. He rarely comes up in the conversation anymore, even though DJ Moore is one of these guys that's ultra slept on in the league with multiple seasons of over 1,000 yards since he's been in the league. Started out his first season just under 800, then 3 years in a row of over 1,100 yards. This year, 162 targets. I don't understand why he's not more in the conversation, but people leave him out. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to push CeeDee Lamb out, you better have a damn good reason for it. And I can't find a reason to keep CeeDee Lamb out of the top 5. I think he's got a ceiling that's as good as A.J. Brown's. I think he has a ceiling that could surpass DK Metcalf in target share, and he could probably match him in touchdowns potentially year from year. Stephon Diggs is old. Deontay Johnson's situation is going to change. DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle's 23, but we only seen really 1 year from him. There's just too many question marks out there. So for me to say CeeDee Lamb doesn't deserve to be in the top 5 is an absolute hot take. And whether you try to defend it or not, I think in the end, you're going to come out wrong. And if you bet against CeeDee Lamb, if you are selling him for pennies on the dollar, and he does turn into the next DeAndre Hopkins, you are going to be pissed.